Alright, hello once again, Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and as part of the Rankin Technical College AWD, or Application and Website Development Program, and in particular the AWD 1111.NET Framework with Web Databases class for the fall 2019 semester, I am creating a series of video presentations based on the textbook we'll use for the class, and that being ProASP.NET MVC 5, as you see on the screen. An APress text written by Adam Freeman. I'm working my way through Chapter 25, and I'm on page 721. And the author says here, performing model validation in the action method is only one of the techniques available in the MVC framework. In the following sections, we'll see other approaches. So the default model binder performs validation as part of the binding process. Okay, we've seen this already. And in this case, we've left nothing in the date field, and it says the date field is required. All right. The error displayed for the date has been added to the model binder, but because it wasn't in the right format. Now, I don't even think we can do this and say hello because we get a date picker. All right, so as time has gone on, and let's double check that. So, can we remove this? Not only can we not remove it, notice if I try to put something that's out of range. So I'll try to put in here a 9. See how it moves me over? It won't let me put, for example, 99 in there. If I put in a 1, and then I try to put in a 9, okay, it actually changed that to a 2. So it's making sure. So the other thing is, okay, I put in a 2 here. Okay, now I want to put in 31. Okay, I'm surprised it let me do that, but 9999. Please enter a valid value. The field is incomplete or has an invalid value. And the only invalid value is this one. All right. And also notice, let's see, the year 2020 will be a leap year. So I should be able to, if I put a 29 in here and I put in 2019, I get that it's an invalid value. But if I do it for 2020, now it is valid. So not only are they making sure that you put in valid values, as far as, this field has to be between 1 and 12, this field between 28 and 31, depending on that field, etc. And this field, all right, in fact, let's just change that to 1. That's not a date in the future. So there's built-in smarts, for lack of better words here. The built-in default model binder class, default model binder, provides some useful messages, and they're shown here in table 25.3 that's on page 722. And as the author says, you can override these methods to push validation logic into the binding process. But the author mentioned back in chapter 24, this is not a technique I like because it feels like the wrong place. I prefer to handle validation using metadata applied to the model class. Now this is the way we have looked at this a little bit, and we're going to be looking at it in more depth and breadth of coverage throughout basically the rest of the chapter. So the author says here, the MVC framework supports the use of metadata. Remember, metadata is data about data. We can use this to express model validation rules. The advantage here is it says they're enforced anywhere that the binding process is applied throughout the application, not just in the action method like we did before. The validation attributes are detected and enforced by the built-in default model binder class, default model binder. All right, so how have we changed this? Well, now we know that the name is required. We know already, because we put that before, that it must be a date, and you have to say, please enter a date. Again, we wouldn't even have to put in this one. I guess we could if we left nothing in there. And this is saying that if you don't enter true, or check it, in other words, this is the error message that you'll get. All right, so what we want to do here is we want to come in and change. All right, so we're changing right here the appointment.cs class. All right, well, it actually added too much. How's that? There we go. I think what the author is saying, and I tend to agree completely with what he's saying, and that is putting the stuff in here in the model when you're defining it is more natural. Now, what do I mean by that? And what would the author mean if he said it that way? And that is, when you set up a database and you set up a database schema, all right, you put in there the data type and you put in the size when it makes sense to put the size in. That's kind of what we're doing right here. So the author says, I use two validation attributes in the listing, required and range. The required attribute specifies that the validation error, it is a validation error if you don't submit a value. And the range says this is the subset. So these are the only valid values that are acceptable in here. All right. And the author shows you examples on page 723 and goes on to page 724. All of the validation attributes support specifying a custom error message by setting the value for the error message property like this. Sometimes, all right, it makes a lot of sense to put a message in. Sometimes you can just kind of tell when you leave something off. All right. One thing I would say about this isn't in any book, and you may or may not agree with what I'm about to say. However, what I would say here is, in many ways, doing this is an art. You have to, you never want to put stuff into a form that if somebody leaves something out, that you insult them. In other words, you don't want to give them a message they may find insulting. By the same token, you want to make sure you give them enough information so if they did something wrong, they know what it is they did wrong. All right? So here we're putting in our own custom error message. If you don't use one, the default will be used. Again, we're putting in a custom error message here. And the author says for this one, we cannot use the required attribute because the template and helper for bools generates a hidden element. So in other words, it's not set up to handle that. All right, to work around this, we use a feature of the range attribute that allows me to provide a type, bool, and the upper and lower bounds, true and true. The data type attribute cannot be used to validate user input, only to provide hints. All right. All right, bottom of page 724. Creating a custom property validation attribute. The trick of using the range attribute is to recreate the behavior in the required attribute is a little awkward. Fortunately, it says validation isn't limited to just built-in attributes. We can create our own. Now think about why you might want to do that. Just totally above and beyond the example that, or what's shown on the screen here. Let's suppose that I'm asking you to fill out a form, this appointment form at the doctor's office, and I ask your age. Now, if you're a doctor who treats babies on up to elderly people, you might actually put 0 in there as a valid age, because if a baby is 6 months old, you typically want age to be an integer, so you don't want to put in 0.5. If it was an integer, that would be illegal anyway. But you put in 0 for their first year of life. You'd probably also want to stick and maybe make a maximum value of like 125, 130, or whatever. All right? So, because I skipped it, the author says here we have added an infrastructure folder, as we oftentimes do in here. One thing I do kind of like, we added it, I don't think we did, about this book is let's give the author his due here. All right? And what I mean is, you may not like the way he does things. That's, of course, your determination. However, that said, one thing that this author does is he is almost to the point of being remarkably. Oops, that's not what I wanted. He's consistent, almost to the point of being remarkably consistent. All right? So we're adding a class here, and that class is to be called mustbetrueattribute.cs. And here's what we have. As mentioned previously, you always need to put that using system.componentModel.data annotations at the top when you're doing this. All right. Return the value of isBool and bool value. So it says this class defines a new attribute that we have called must be true. All right? Attribute. And it overrides the isValid method of the base class. This is the method that the model binder will call to validate properties to which the attribute is applied. The logic is simple. A value is valid if it's a bool and it has a type of true. And that's what we're saying here. All right? So now we can go back in, and since we defined that in our infrastructure class, we've got to add that to our appointment.cs, or to our model, in other words. It'll be gray because we're not using it. There we go. And we will change what's up here to must be true. So let's just grab all of it. Like that. And again, whoops, I don't want to overplay, yet I don't want to underplay this. I do want you to understand that when you are setting up validation on a form, err on the side of caution. In other words, if you're saying, well, is that too much information? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Put it in. All right, that's my humble opinion. All right, you never know who is going to be looking at your form. If the person using it will be younger, if English is maybe not their first language, or whatever it happens to be. All right. All right, we're at 15 minutes. The author says this is a neater way of doing it on 725. Okay, the results will be the same. So turning up to page 726, we're going to talk about deriving from the built-in validation attributes, and that'll be what's next.